Hello everybody, it's the History Bounder here, aka Miriam, and welcome to my channel. If you guys follow me on Instagram, you might have seen that I have recently just finished this 1900 to 1910 Edwardian Bolero, crop jacket, whatever you want to call it. So I knew I wanted to make a video about the process of making this. I wanted this video to be more of like a time-lapse and a voiceover kind of video, but unfortunately, because majority of the footage looks like this, so I thought I would just talk about the Bolero, the construction, my inspiration, and what I learned from making this, especially with working with velvet. That's why it is a talk-through and not a walkthrough. Also, I'm not a seamstress. This is literally, except for my Edwardian corset mock-up and my Edwardian combinations, this is my third thing I've made. So there were a lot of things I did to try to fix this that I feel like would be like sacrilegious to some like seamstresses. So it is a good thing that the footage is like unusable. Who knows? So my inspiration actually came from this picture, specifically this outfit in the back. So the skirt that's shown here is a 10 gore princess skirt, and it was really popular in 1906. And for some reason, it just screams Edwardian to me. I think it's just because the boned waist just really emphasizes the silhouette of the time, and I just really loved the structure of the outfit it makes, if that makes sense, with the short bolero and the really high skirt. It's really different from like the later Edwardian era where it's really like straight. Also, another thing I really liked about this picture is the triangle cutouts. I thought that was a really interesting detail to add instead of excess embellishments, which I was kind of worried I wouldn't be able to do, especially with finding things that looked antique enough. And also I didn't want to make this overly Edwardian, if that makes sense, because I do want to wear this out in daily life, and I didn't want to make it feel too costumey. Speaking of being too costumey, let's talk about the parts of this that's not historically accurate. The main thing that I found in my research is that these boleros had lapels. Actually, after filming this video, I found a lot of examples for boleros without lapels. I didn't know where these were when I was researching, but yeah, apparently these were quite common as well. Second is the material. Not the velvet itself, but the lining inside is a polycotton blend. And the reason I picked that was because I couldn't find like a purple cotton for some reason. And since this velvet was like pretty expensive, I had to cut it somewhere. So yeah, I want to talk about the velvet. Here's my advice for someone who's new to sewing or hasn't sewn before but really wants to get into it, and it's don't start with velvet. Try easier materials first. Velvet is, people say velvet is tough for a reason, and it is. There's so many rules that come with it, like never fold velvet, never cut it on the fold, don't use too many pins, only use silk thread, and never ever iron it. But despite this, I was able to use velvet, and the more I used it, the better I got with it, and I think it turned out pretty well. Plus, a good thing about velvet is that because it's textured, you can barely see any stitching from the outside. And for someone like me who's in college, who doesn't really have time to hand sew everything, it was like a saving grace. So if you really want to use velvet, go slow and don't expect your stitching to be 100% straight, because I found that the fibers got in the way and tended to make me wobble. But then again, that's just me. I don't even know if I can sew straight on a normal fabric, so. For this project, I used Truly Victorian's 1898 Eton jacket pattern. As much as I love their patterns, I wish I chose a pattern for something that closes and could be made without lapels, because with that pattern, I had to make so many adjustments. I even made two mock-ups, and the second one turned out worse than the first one, so I don't know what I did wrong, but after the second one, I was just like, flip this, I'm gonna start with the actual thing, and just let's hope for the best, which I think it turned out pretty good. Anyway, because I couldn't find a pattern specifically for like the Edwardian Bolero, I would probably use a 1960s crop jacket pattern instead if I could do this again. Mainly because they close and you have so many options for different lapels, or even if you don't want them. It would also be easier just to add the point at the front, because that's just drawing up extra fabric instead of having to completely reshape the front. Speaking of the point, I think it's one of the most important parts of the jacket, especially if you go through pictures of Edwardian women. A lot of the small boleros tend to be pointed in the front, and it really emphasizes the silhouette of the time. So that's why I literally restitched the point, because overconfident me was like, oh, this is so much extra fabric, let me just snip it off. And then I snipped too much, and then the rest of the creating process I was just like trying to ignore it, but then at the end I was like, oh, I can't ignore it, so let me just do something quickly. And I think it looks fine from far away. Obviously if you're up close you can really see that it's really messy, but like no one's gonna be like staring at it. So don't learn from me, be careful about cutting your extra fabric. Before I move on to the inside, I just want to let you guys know that I know it's messy. I've said it before, I'm not a seamstress, I'm still practicing, and I feel like so many people will be in physical pain seeing the inside, but you know what? I don't have time to clean it up, so let's just... Plus, like, then they not always finish their seams back in the day. I mean, right? You can literally see my progression of skill of making the seams. The first one, I tried to make a mock French seam, but because the velvet was so thick and I couldn't iron it flat, I literally could not keep it rolled down to stitch. So I had to just like leave this seam open, I guess. But for the next ones, I used a real French seam, and I really recommend using a real French seam when working with velvet or other thick materials, because it just holds it so well. Plus, I really like the way it looks, so I think I'm going to just use it as much as possible. Of course, my seams are still messy, but I think by the time I work on the skirt, I think I'm going to be an expert at it, so let's hope for that. There are also so many tutorials on YouTube about how to do a French seam, so find one that really works for you, and again, I really recommend it, especially for velvet. Okay, I want to talk about the sleeves, because there's so much to cover here. First, I hand stitched the sleeves in because the idea of putting this under a sewing machine really freaked me out, because I thought I would catch other fabric and then I would lose the gathers, and I was just like, no, I'm not. I'm gonna suffer through it. I'm gonna stitch it up. I know gathering is supposed to be like easy, but it's hard, okay? Making these gathers the same as these gathers, impossible. I tried my best, but I couldn't do it. I just couldn't match these two together, and it clearly shows. So this sleeve is puffy because right in the middle, I gathered it less, but on each side, I gathered it more and tighter. But that also makes it really weirdly square on the side. And now this sleeve is really flat, but on the side, it has more of that normal curve for a sleeve. You can see I tried to add more gathers at the front, but then I lacked them on the back. So they turned out really different. It could also be the size of my shoulders. I believe this shoulder I accidentally made too long, so that might have also stopped it from being puffier, I guess. I don't know how that would work, but I guess so. I might go back and change the sleeve if I have time, which I probably won't have time. But I mean, it's like fine, right? If anything, I might just like stick something in there to help it. But we'll figure it out. So the bodice was supposed to have triangle cutouts as well, but by the time I noticed that I never cut them, I had already put the trim in, and also I didn't have enough trim. Plus, I was having a really hard time with placement and not making them like point directly at my boobs, so maybe it's for the best that I didn't add them. What I learned from making the sleeves and what I would do next time if I was to remake this was I would attach the sleeves first to the bodice, especially try to perfect the gathering before adding any like cutouts or like embellishments. That's mainly because when I added the sleeves, the triangle cutout actually reached all the way to my elbow, and it was really awkward. So whenever I would bend my arm, it would be really uncomfortable because this big like bunch of fabric would just like be in the way. So while attached to the bodice, I had to undo the trimming and adjust it, and it was just Oh my god, it was so annoying. Also on top of the triangle, you might have noticed that I did this weird curve thing with the trimming instead of following the triangle all the way through. Now I did this because when I did follow the triangle all the way through, the trimming reached awkwardly high and I just didn't like the way it looked. So I curved it over. Also, I couldn't neatly hem the very tops of the triangle, so I added these button appliques. I was supposed to add them here, but then I didn't really like how they look, so I just stuck them here and cut out the attachment part and curved the trimming around that. And I think it looks pretty okay. It looks pretty good. So the trimming is pretty self-explanatory. I just pinned it a 1/4 inch from the edge and stitched it on either side with black thread. So I thought about doing top stitching like what it shows in the picture, but I didn't want to buy the top stitch thread or the needle, and I wasn't confident with how straight I could stitch anyway, so I was like, this trim works for me, so I was like, okay. And even though the trim is like, I'm 99% sure like polyester, it still looks pretty good, so I'm pretty happy about that. So I added 13 eyelets to this piece, and I know that's a lot, but that's because the front edge wasn't perfectly straight, so I wanted to add as many as I can to make sure that it looked straight. So I added the eyelets 1 inch apart with an extra one at the bottom just to make sure that the point was close together as well. I think that's pretty much it. I think the most important things that I learned, and I think the main takeaways should be that if you want to make an Edwardian bolero, use a 1960s crop jacket pattern and also make a mock-up. You will have to make a mock-up. French seams are the best for velvet in my opinion. Gather and add sleeves before embellishing them. And if you have a project that you want to do but you don't feel like you have the skill for it, I still recommend doing it because you'll still learn so much from it, and it's really fun to make something that you're like really motivated towards. Alright everybody, I think that is it. Sorry again I couldn't make this into a time-lapse / more in-depth video about the process of making this, but I still really wanted to talk about it, and I really hope you guys enjoyed it nevertheless. Next video, I'll be finishing this outfit by making the princess skirt. I'll link this pattern in the description as well. And hopefully filming will be better. I have a few ideas on how I'm going to actually film it, and hopefully those work out. I also kind of want to make a matching hat with any of the excess cabbage I have left over, but we shall see. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching and making it all the way to the end of the video. If you guys have any tips for me or each other, I would really love to read them down in the comments below. Not just for sewing, but even just for video making or just anything in general. You guys can also follow me on Instagram or Twitter to stay updated with my projects and upcoming videos. I hope to see you guys soon. Goodbye!